And now, for another look at old Latrobe. This is number 4 of our trips back in time, attempting to see how Latrobe came about and what it was all about back in the days of yesteryear. This takes us to 1892. This is the very center of Latrobe. This is where it all started from. This was the 3 or 4 acres that Oliver Barnes gave to the railroad. The railroad was really the heart of Latrobe. And this right here is the next thing we'll see. This was the original station. It was not just a train station, it was also a hotel, the railroad hotel. There was a restaurant, ticket office, waiting room in here. But that was not the only hotel. There were 2 hotels at the beginning. One was the railroad hotel. The other one was this one. Major David Williams had this one built, and he ran this. In 1854, when Latrobe was incorporated, this is where the first voting took place. It took place here because there was no city hall or borough hall there yet. So Major Williams allowed the voting to take place in his house, in his hotel. Williams' presence here also shows the importance of the railroad. Williams was one of the contractors that helped build the Pennsylvania Railroad, and he stayed in town for some time. In the early 1880s, George Dallas Albert tells us that he was still there. Williams was also involved in one of the local banks. Now here we can take a look and see just where that hotel was. See, here's the railroad hotel right here, the railroad yard and freight house, and right over here, this was Williams's hotel. I put this in here for a couple reasons. One was to show the kind of locomotives the Pennsylvania Railroad was using then. Also, in a way, this symbolizes the Pennsylvania Railroad. It's a rather weak, spindly looking little thing, but in truth, the Pennsylvania Railroad was at the beginning not the potent economic and political force that it became. To symbolize that, I put this in here. This, as a symbol, serves to show what the Pennsylvania Railroad did become. A very powerful financial, political, social force in the world that it was a part of. I mean, it ran the whole way out through Ohio into Indiana. It was much bigger than Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Railroad, when it was first starting, was really strapped for cash and really couldn't do the things it wanted to do. But it eventually got to do them, and we'll see how that affected the area around Latrobe. See, at the beginning, when the Pennsylvania Railroad was put down, it laid right at the level of the streets. This elevation wasn't there. This came about in the first decade of the 20th century, when the Pennsylvania Railroad became a potent economic force, and it could do the things that it wanted to do. It raised the streets up because when a train would come in and park, it blocked these streets. You know, the traffic couldn't move. So what was done was these fine, good old stones were put in here, and the level was raised about 13 feet. This was the railroad's yard, the railroad yard. Right in the middle of here, there was once cattle pens for animals that would be shipped in and out on the railroad. Cows, steers, things like that, pigs. Down in this corner was the freight house. This view from 1901, excuse me, please, shows the middle of town before the renovations started. This was the 3 or 4 acres comprising the railroad yards. This is part of that. The lower part, you can see here also, see how the railroad has been elevated. The railroad was raised 13 feet. It says it has 12 foot 11 inches clearance. This is the station down here, the Latrobe station, which is not the one it started out with. This was also rebuilt. The station was replaced during these renovations in the first decade of the 20th century. This is now on the National Register of Historic Sites, and it's a good example of historic reuse, you know, the adaptation of an older building. This is the newer station. This is the newer location of the freight house. And this again, the very center of Latrobe, where it started out. This is the adaptation of the railroad station as a restaurant. In the 1970s, the railroad put the station out of business, and it sat empty for a good while, and it didn't do that any good. This shows the station down here, the view looking more or less northeast. A black and white view, a more sober and analytical kind of treatment of the structures. This shows us, it reminds me that not just did they work on structures in Latrobe, but the whole main line from Harrisburg out to Pittsburgh was retracked. They put 2 more additional sets of rails in, so it was no longer the 2-rail track arrangement as it had been, but they made it 4-rail. And all that also happened out through Greensburg, where they also put in a new railroad station out there at this time. The one thing I want to call your attention to is when they became better off, the Pennsylvania Railroad also straightened things out. See this really sharp curve down here? That was something they really didn't want to do in the beginning, but they really didn't have the time or the money to go through this hill. But as time went on, they were able to do that. See, this shows both alignments. This is the new alignment, and this is the older alignment as it was originally built. And I'll point that out with a little bit of color. Color helps everything. You see, this is the main line with nice gentle gradual curves on, as it is today. And this shows the original curve that it was in there. Because one of the rules of thumb for building a railroad is at the beginning you build it on the cheap because you don't have a lot of money. And then when the money comes in, then you start to do the things like this. You know, this is in that first decade of the 20th century when they were able to rebuild, you know, to make the changes. When the railroad was first built in the 1850s, the digging machines they had were a bunch of Irishmen with picks and shovels and little donkey carts. And so in 50 years, things did change. Even though this looks antiquated to us, it's certainly an improvement on what they started out with. This is 1939. This is the alignment, the new alignment of the PRR, the main line. And what I'm going to do is see if I can show you the old alignment. It's still there. See, this is the new alignment. This is the old alignment right here, going around that hill. And it slowed traffic down. I mean, for a train to go around there, you had to, you know, take that curve at a slower pace. And I think we're about at time now, and I'm going to say so long. We'll have more of these on Latrobe. And so long for now. Bye.